It's the Better Learning Podcast. My name's Kevin Stoller. I am joined with my co-host for today with Carla Cummins. Carla, how's it going?
Excellent.
And we're going to pull in Trevor Muir, who we got to meet at LearningSCAPES in Portland, and he's just an inspirational storyteller with a passion towards education. Trevor, how's it going?
Oh, it's going so good, Kevin. Good to see you both again.
And it's great to see you. And I know you're used to the podcast game with your podcast, and you do a lot of speaking. But when we've changed this format, we were going to do a podcast before we changed this format around the movie, and you fired it back right away. I want to talk about Harry Potter.
100%. Yeah, when you said like, hey, let's talk about the relation of education and a movie, I was like, oh, you know what? Everybody's going to do Dead Poets Society, or maybe talk about Boy Meets World. But I was like, I want to dive in to some magical school. So
that's awesome. I'm just going to give my disclaimer across the board. I had never watched Harry Potter until the last few days because of this.
You're kidding me.
No.
You and Trevor are no longer friends. I just want you to know, Kevin.
Kevin, I gotta go. It's been nice to be here. We'll talk to you all later.
Listen, I can't communicate with people like you.
It's so like bedrock to my generation. Like it's
well, that's why I'm excited that that it's on there, and I'll give you the reason why. Like my oldest is 17. We read the book to him when he was younger, but my wife and I swapped between it. So I only when I read the book, I got like every other chapter.
Okay, yeah. I know that game. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you know that game. And so it was one of those that it just never really connected. And then my son didn't really grab to it. So we're like, all right, we're not going to read the rest of them. And, but yeah, that's the story why. And when I watch, I'm like, oh, I feel like I know all of this because it's so embedded in our culture.
And what's interesting is I was late in life to be introduced to it. Like I watched the movies growing up. And then when my own boy was, when my son, he was probably too young for it, but I was like, it's finally time for me to get to read this. And I read it to him when he was like 6. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. It's like, oh, this is writing that stretches across decades. And so I love the books and I love the movies. And I think there's a lot of really good tie-ins to school and teaching and kids. And so... Yeah, that's why I chose that one.
All right. Let's jump in. Carla, any personal connections for you into Harry Potter?
Listen, I know I was picking on you, but Trevor and I can't be friends either. No.
Oh,
I just was roasting you, Kevin. No. Do you know, there's none. I don't have any. None of my kids ever gravitated towards Harry Potter. I have older ones. Trevor, 26 is my oldest, 26, 19, 14, but none of them have. So although I've seen the movies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man, I feel like we just completely...
We failed you.
So this is going to be...
I'm going to be an ambassador here. And I'm not a crazy... I just love it. It's such a good story. And it's so relevant. And it just keeps working. Like every time you reread it or you watch the movies, you're like, oh, this is some good source material here.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, that's what I'm watching it now, as an adult, going through it and recognizing the storylines that go through it. And I'm like, ooh, you can see it, and you could even see where the series and the the book and the movie go to. Do you want it, Trevor? All right. Do you want to give a little bit of the context of it, of talking about the first one, Harry Potter?
Yeah.
And give a little bit of what was the background for you, or coming through to this movie, because it came out in 2001, which actually surprised me. I thought it was later than that. So
it's a long time ago now. I was in 8th grade, and it's about a boy who doesn't think he's special, and then he finds out that he's special. And that's what the whole story is. And I think that's why so many people are drawn to it, because it's everybody in their early adolescence desperately wants to be special. And most of us don't feel that way. And so when you have a story that like embodies that, where you're like, okay, yeah, this is about a kid, and the way he became special, for those of you who have not been paying attention to American
Which is
popular
not me
culture for the last
anymore
30
because
years. Yeah. But like he's a boy who is raised in a non-magical home and doesn't know that there's this whole world out there. And then he finds out that he's actually a magician. He's got magic in his blood. And he's been raised in this abusive household with some really terrible aunt and uncle because his parents died. And he doesn't know anything about his life. And then all of a sudden he finds out he's a magician. He goes to this school. And in this school, he just is introduced to this whole world. And it turns out he's like a celebrity in this world. He's got this like rich magical background, and it makes him a celebrity, and he's learning how to be a magician, and at the same time he's learning how to be a teenager, and he's learning how to have friends, and it's just like, man, when I look at my own life and I think about like my first day of middle school and how hard it was and how I didn't know anybody, and just all the adjustments that are required, and just going from being a kid and having a high voice and being squeaky and all this, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, now you're not a little boy anymore. You got a deep voice, and you've got to adjust, and this girl, you like her, but you don't know what to do about it. And it's this whole world. It's like, oh, I can relate to Harry, right? Like I can relate to the transition that's happening here. And I think that's my personal theory of why it's resonated with so many people, because it's like, oh, I see myself in it.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. It was like, for the first 10, 11 years of his life, like he was kind of in like an abusive, like he didn't matter, like
kept in a small cupboard under the stairs.
Yeah,
no birthdays.
And then all of a sudden, now you get into this special world.
I think too, the thing that I walked away with is like recognizing that we all have superpowers, right? And I think, Trevor, that's what you say. Like, he wasn't special. He wanted to be special. But we all have those things that, people recognize in you that you don't always recognize in yourself, or that you don't always know about yourself, those blind spots that are those. And so it's
I'm going to jump right into some of these award categories. If you guys are good with that. All right.
Yeah.
So the first one we always start with is, most of these movies that are school related, there's usually like one teacher that stands out. We call it the John Keating Award after Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society. There's a lot of teachers in here. This wasn't like a runaway like victory for me. Who did you guys have as like who is like that teacher or that mentor that really stood out as the best one in the movie?
Yeah, that's a toughie, because like none of the you go ahead.
My first one was Professor McGonagall.
Yeah.
I felt like she was the one that like just really showed like how much she trusted and like how much belief she had.
Yeah. And yet she was also like firm, and like, but it's like, I don't know. I've been around a lot of teachers, and I've also learned in my own teaching practice that like firm is good. Students need structure. Students need to know that there's a stability. Students don't need their teachers to be their best friends. They need them to be people who are serious about the work, and serious about the relationship, and serious about the time in the classroom, but then also care deeply about them and make sure their students know about it. And McGonagall always did that well. I want to say Dumbledore, but in the first book, actually in all the books and movies, Dumbledore is a little aloof to some of Harry's stuff, and he knows about his problems, but he also kind of stands back and lets Harry solve them himself, which I think there's some merit to that. But I don't know, as a teacher, I just think bedrock to teaching is building connections with your students, relationships. If a student knows they are cared about, they will do the hard work of learning in school. And so, yeah, I think McGonagall's a really good one for that.
I was the same. If I were looking at it, I would think the same thing.
Yeah. The other one that I considered was Hagrid, even though he's not really the teacher, but the whole idea of that, like, there's this like one person that, the kid, like that a kid trusts, that they're around, like if they just know that there's that one adult on campus that cares about them.
That's good.
I thought he did pretty good. Yeah.
I didn't even connect that dots. Good job, Kevin.
Yeah. All right.
That's good. I love Hagrid too. I think sometimes he needs to use his authority a little bit more. Like as a brand new teacher, that's a really hard thing to do. Like, you want your students to love you. You want to be everybody's favorite. And so like, I remember as a brand new teacher, like letting too many things slide. And when really it's like, oh no, you have to go a little McGonagall. You have to have some firmness mixed with the stuff that students like. And so I love, but Hagrid plays a really important role. And I think there's definitely that role should be played in school is being somebody who deeply connects with students. Yeah. I think the best teachers are a little bit of both, if I'm going to be honest. Yeah. Sometimes McGonagall gets a little too serious. Sometimes Hagrid goes a little too loose. It's like, oh, let's combine those.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Next category, the cliques, the iconic stereotypes that you would see in schools today. How was that represented in Harry Potter?
I mean, clearly the house system, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Hufflepuff, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, like the school, it's by design, which is really interesting because like when I went into middle school, we had 2 different teams. And whatever team you were on, that's where your friends were on. That's where you identified. That's like you had your own house that you were a part of. Like in middle school, I had the Flamingos and the Islanders. In middle school, and in 7th grade, we had the Waves and the Sharks. Like, and so it's kind of by design, and it creates, it bonds you. But then it also creates rivalry.
So the fact that you actually have that experience, I'd be curious because I agree. Like the way they do it in the house, and I know a lot of schools have implemented this type of like house type of setting in there. From the inside, when you were part of it, was there intentionality? Like in this one, they make it seem like it's random from the hat. But when schools implement that, I've always been curious of like, are they like really looking to be like, hey, like, let's look at the dynamics, or is it just purely like random assignment?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the times when you do it at the big house level at schools, it's random. It's like, yep, all right, we need this many boys and this many girls in each team, and that's how we're going to split it up. But I will say that when students are like, when they're deciding, all right, who's your teacher going to be when you get to 4th grade or 5th grade or 11th grade or 12th grade, teachers are often very intentional about how we place students. I know that was one of our practices. At the end of the year, we'd get to the end and we'd say, all right, they're going to move on to Mike's class next year. Who should we put together, or who do we need to keep apart? You know what I mean? Like in Harry Potter, going back to Harry Potter, Malfoy and Harry would not do really good together. And I like to think that the Sorting Hat kind of figured that out and said like, all right, we should not put Harry and Malfoy together. They are going to be like oil and water. So let's separate them. I've had plenty of times where I'm like, all right, these 2 students just can't seem to get along, or they just can't seem to focus when they're in the same classroom. And so easy fix, let's separate them. Doesn't mean they can't be friends, but it just means you can't be in English class. Or like, hey, if I'm creating groups for my students, I always tell this to teachers when we're talking about collaboration. How do you help students collaborate well together? Be intentional about how you create groups. Don't just let students choose groups. I know that's what they want. That's not how the world works. Right, Kevin, when you hire people, do they get to choose? Do they get to choose who they work with? Or they're like, I'm only working here if you hire my friends too.
Well, I mean, we hope we're all friends, but Carla and I, we do. Though. Yeah, exactly.
That's my point, is that they weren't friends at first, though. They became friends in the culture that you have.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, and it's funny. We actually use like a specific tool to do that. We use it. It's called Culture Index that we use, and we try to look at that and make sure that we have a well-rounded team and be like, okay, we're leaning a little too. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Well, and I think teachers can do the same thing. It's about, I call it strategic group formation.
Yeah.
Which, like, we're going to form groups with a strategy. Like, you know what? This group could use a little bit more leadership, and I know that this student has a propensity towards leadership. This group, we're working on this project where students need some art skills to put something together beautifully. All right, well, I'm going to make sure that one of my fine detail people or my art people is going to be in this group. And so I'm being strategic about it. So going back to Harry Potter, it's like, oh, the Sorting Hat does that. Like, and as you get deeper into the books, it actually kind of reads the students' minds and sorts that way. So there's strategy in the hat. And I think the best strategy when you're forming groups or forming classes is to put thought into it.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Next category, the class clown. Is there someone who provides that, that comic relief, that humor?
You got to be Ron Weasley there.
Yeah.
I mean, Ron's just ridiculous, and they'll be in like the worst situation. the first book and movie, that's there's not the spiders yet. That's the second one. But Ron, no matter how bad and dire things get, he just says the most ridiculous things.
Yeah.
And he's not trying to be funny either. And that's why I think the best class clowns are just funny by nature rather than just trying to be the whole time.
But it's timing too, though. I mean, yeah, he did have very good timing of when to insert that. Yeah,
that's
for
right.
sure.
Yeah, good comedy relies on good timing.
Yeah, yeah. Carla, you agree with that one? Any other?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right, then we'll move on to homecoming scene. This is it doesn't really mean it's a homecoming scene, but is there like an iconic like moment within the movie? There were a handful that I feel like could be falling into here. But you know, like whether it's like a school dance, pep rally, sports game wrapped around for me, I mean it was the game. Quidditch. Am I saying it right?
100%.
All right. Yeah. I'm like, oh, like that was when you get everyone around, and like it felt very much like like a Friday night football game.
Yeah, and what I love about the Quidditch in the movies and in the book is like that's pretty realistic, at least for American schooling. I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but like sometimes I think there might be an overemphasis on school sports, but also school sports is about culture. It's about binding people together. It's about creating community in the school with the hopefully desired impact on the community. It brings everybody together. And that's what Quidditch really, like that's like the vehicle it serves in the movies is like, let's have our houses come together and join up to root our teammates on, root our friends on.
Yeah. I thought the sorting ceremony, Kevin.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That could be a really good one.
I mean, you really think about it. I mean, it sort of sets the tone for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. I would say the one thing, with the game, which kind of loses, that they were competing within their own school.
Mm.
So that you didn't get that rallying all, like it wasn't
Yeah.
like they were, Hogwarts was playing, like the other local
Yes.
wizardry school, in town where you have that crosstown rivalry.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think the books in the movie does a great job of bringing the whole school together. It's very much house against house all the way through.
Yeah.
Which I don't really like very much. I mean, I'd rather the whole school feel like we're all binded together. I mean, like another thing in the which is actually also realistic. One of the things that they do in the book and the movie is they do the house points. And so every time you do something good, you get house points. You do something bad, you get them taken away. It's like an incentive system for good behavior. That's very true. Like that's the story I shared. I think no, I didn't share that at A4LE or at LearningSCAPES, but that's a real thing. When I was in middle school, we had a thing called flamingo bucks that you can get them and earn them, or they can be taken away. And in Harry Potter, it's whatever house has the most of the points wins the house cup. And that's like the big coveted award. When I was in middle school, the person who had the most flamingo bucks got a waterproof Discman, which is equally
a
big
waterproof what?
That.
Discman,
Yeah,
5
Sony
pounds of
Discman.
yellow and black magic.
Yes, like the classic yellow and black one. Yeah.
Anti-skip proof.
Carla, we had the cassette tape ones.
I'm like,
The Walkman was what we had.
Yeah, you had the Walkman. Yeah, so you had tapes. I don't know. I'm just saying, I love to pop in my Spice Girls tape and cruise up and down the hallway.
Stop it, Spice Girls.
Come on. Oh, those
that's
uncomfortable.
That's where this conversation is going to go. Just so you know. I mean, I love them too, though. But
yeah, tell me what you want. What you really
want.
What you really want. Yeah.
So like that was our house bucks, was flamingo bucks. And here's the thing though, I remember like working so hard to earn as many of them as I could. And then at the very end of that one of my first semester in 6th grade, I spoke out loud in class when I wasn't supposed to. And the teacher punished me by taking all of my points away. Like
wait,
I lost
all of them?
All of them. The entire, so I had 497 saved up. Not that I remembered it. And he
what
took
was this
500
teacher's
away.
name, Trevor?
I would never reveal that on a public podcast. But like
all of them?
Every single one. He says, I am deducting 500 flamingo bucks from you. You need to learn to follow the rules. And I'm like, okay, that's a harsh punishment. But then also, I remember learning this lesson that it doesn't matter how hard you work or how much you earn, it can all just be taken away from you in an instant. And this is the same semester that my parents split up, right? This is this. And so it's like, when you look at like life that way, when you look at students that way, it's like, And I remember the second semester, I was like, screw it. I don't need to earn. I don't need to do anything to get on his good side. In fact, I'll do everything I can to get under his skin and make him pay for the way that he made me feel. So it's like, yeah, incentives are good. But if that's the only bedrock for good behavior, it's like that's a house built on sand. And so like as you relate things to Harry Potter, it's like, yeah, you know what? Love the story. There's certain things that I don't know if they're actually really a good thing in a school. Like the house system. Yep, it builds community, but it also builds division, right?
Yeah.
Incentive. It promotes good behavior, and it also promotes life lessons that hurt, right?
Well, I was going to say, although, you said it, I would be specky affected if it took me all quarter or whatever it was to earn those and have them taken away with one thing. It's a lot, but the lesson you walked away with, even in middle school, is a pretty massive lesson, right?
Yeah. Well, and then, then the question is like, all right, so should we not have any incentive systems in school? It's like, well, no, because I have a 5th and a 3rd grader living in my house, and they will do anything for extra recess, right? Like
that's right.
So it's like, no, it works, but then also I know the downside. So it's really like, read the room. You know what I mean? It's about figuring out what works, what doesn't, how much of this should I put emphasis on? How do I build intrinsic motivation before we get to the extrinsic motivation? That's why teaching's hard. Leading a school is hard. It's challenging. And that's why I have so much respect for educators, because it's like, no, you're having to juggle a lot, and you're having to really navigate through complexities to figure out what works best.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're at the point right now. So with my kids, like, you can see the different incentives at, a 17-year-old, 12-year-old, 8-year-old. I mean, a 12-year-old is doing like her and her friends will do anything to have this donut party that they're promising right now.
A donut party at school?
Yes. Yeah.
And you're probably like, do I not buy you donuts when you want them? Like,
no, I'm like as much time and effort. Yeah, I think you just go buy a donut and
they're $1.25, but okay. That's great. I love it. Well, but like as a teacher, then it's like, all right, well then I'm going to take advantage of this if it's going to help motivate them.
Yeah, they got them all bought in.
I've always wished that my kids were motivated by incentives, but they have never. Not scholastic incentives and not parental incentives. I'm like, I will give you $100 for every A you get. And mind you, I still have my $100.
There you go.
Have you ever wondered how a simple change in your classroom can revolutionize learning? At K-12, we believe the physical space is key. When we partnered with Gary Community Schools in Indiana, something incredible happened. Their classrooms were outdated and uninspiring. Using our radically student-centered approach, we reimagined their spaces. The transformation was nothing short of amazing. Teachers saw immediate results, students came back from winter break excited, more engaged, collaboration increased, and overall performance improved. One student even shared, "We have new furniture, it's like Christmas all over again." On the first day back, local media came in to cover the story, capturing the joy and excitement of students discovering their new learning environments. See how we can transform your school today. Visit kay-twelve.com to learn more about our innovative approach. K-12, because every student deserves an inspiring place to learn. Visit kay-twelve.com today.
One-liner. Was there a line, like an iconic line or dialogue that kind of stood out as your favorite, or something that is most memorable about in this movie?
Yeah, it's when Hagrid is meeting Harry out on that island, and he's with his aunt and uncle, and all feels hopeless for Harry, and all of a sudden Hagrid busts in and he goes, "You're a wizard, Harry." So it's like, "You're a wizard, Harry." It's in story terms, it's the turn. It's like where all of a sudden it's like it was all going this direction, and then it turned in that moment. which is so good and realistic. Cause I think we all have those moments where somebody speaks into us and all of a sudden that's where the turn can happen. So yeah, you're a wizard, Harry.
Yeah, mine was when he said, you know, your mother died to save you, right? And I forget what he said though, but what specifically, but ultimately it was about love, right? Love is the meaning behind everything. And so if you have been loved deeply, like your mother loved you so deeply that she died for you.
That's good.
I mean, is there
good.
anything more true? Like,
yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I love that story, because it's deep. You know, like, yeah, it's like about like magic and potions. It's also about like sacrifice and love. And it's like, oh, that's so good.
Yeah. There were a couple. Ron, when he's talking about Hermione, he goes, "It's spooky. She knows more about you than you do." And Harry's like, "Who doesn't?"
That's great.
Like that one was good. And then Voldemort had this line. I don't really remember the context, but there's no good and evil. There's only power, and those too weak to seek it. And I'm like, oh, that's heavy. That's like, there's a lot in that.
Yeah, but then, oh my gosh, that's so good. And yet the whole Harry Potter story is about how that's not true, right? Like the whole entire narrative is, all right, here is a group of friends who are super powerful, and yet they don't seek more power, right? Like instead, or Dumbledore, here is the most powerful wizard in the world, and he chooses to give up his power. He chooses to so it's like, it's about how that's the lie that has dominated humanity. And then Harry and his friends and Dumbledore reveal that it's not true. It's not actually a true story.
Yeah. All right, we've touched on some of these already, but the realistic or ridiculous. So looking at aspects of this movie versus what we know from our experience working in schools, anything stand out as more realistic, or on the other side, completely ridiculous?
Yeah, I mean, I think the realistic is that there's different teaching styles happening at Hogwarts. You know, you've got the history teacher, Mr. Benz, who just lectures all day long, and the kids are all just falling asleep, and he's actually in the story a ghost. Like, he died while lecturing and never even realized it, and so just kept on lecturing. And like, that might be the deep cut from the books, but he's just like this very, very, very boring lecturing. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I had those growing up, and there was some value, but a lot of it, don't remember a single thing that I learned. When you lecture without reinforcing or doing anything else, or when you talk for an hour straight and expect students to remember it, brain science says that doesn't happen. Our brains cannot hold on to information that long. It needs something to break it up. But that's realistically still present in way too many places. But then you have other teachers who are super hands-on, like Mrs. Sprout, where they're growing mandrakes and they're growing and doing all this hands-on stuff and putting their hands in the soil, or in a potions class when they're actually, even Snape, who's not a very good teacher, but he's an expert at his stuff. He has the kids make their potions. It's like, oh, there's a lot of teachers who are doing really cool hands-on stuff to teach. So it's both.
Yeah. The one that for me was the ridiculous is just how many times the three of them were roaming around the school by themselves. I'm like, you don't see that too often in real schools where it can be like that.
Shouldn't be, but
that's where they have all the trouble. That's where all the good stories happen, though. Right?
Exactly. That's funny. Yeah. I'm trying to think what else is ridiculous. I haven't flown on a flying broom before.
I have one, if you ask my kids.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
You're a witch, Mom.
I know. They would never say that, but pretty much.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
All right. Anything? So I don't know, because this is a different one, because it's a weird. It's like not a. I don't know. Maybe you do know, Trevor. Like, was there a time period where this was supposed to be taking place?
It's supposed to be modern time.
So just modern time. So
Late
if
90s.
it was going to be made now in 2024 going into 2025, would there be elements that you think would be different?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the funny things about Harry Potter is the magical world chooses not to be a part of the modern world. And they integrate in some ways, But like you notice there's no electricity, there's no phones, there's no modern amenities in that way. But then there's some, but like they don't have phones, they don't have some of these things. And like that's by design. They actually solve all of those problems with magic, right? Like they don't have vacuums, they have wands that clean up the room. They don't have electric lights, they have oil lamps. And so if it happened again today, I think it would be the same thing. It would be this like choose to remove ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think school could take a lesson from that in some ways, but then also needs, I think school sometimes feels like this radically removed place in our society where all of the things we do in regular life just don't exist here. It's like, well, you know what I mean? Like, we're going to put you in 6 different classes throughout the day that have nothing to do with each other. We're going to keep them separate, and you're going to have to take tests every week that are going to determine whether you get to keep moving forward. And we're going to have you learn a bunch of information that has no bearing on the rest of your life, but you have to learn it well enough so that you can go to college someday. Right? Like, there's all these things that it's like, okay, this feels quite outdated. And then there's other things where it's like, oh yeah, but you know what? I don't think we should allow students to have unadulterated access to cell phones in school. I think the research shows that doesn't work. I think the stories and anecdotes from almost every teacher I've ever talked to says it does not work to let kids have unlimited use of their phones in class. So maybe it needs to be a little bit more like Harry Potter in that way and say, you know what? We're going to be a Luddite zone. We don't have phones in here. We're going to learn with our hands. We're going to learn by listening. But sometimes maybe we need phones. So it's kind of like what I said earlier. It's gray. It's both.
From my perspective, it had this like almost timeless component to it, where because of that, it felt like it could happen in any era. I feel like in a lot of ways there was like, to me, it's a little bit of like the first Willy Wonka movie. Like it came out and you knew it wasn't modern era, but it was a little older than modern era. But because of that, it made it kind of like classic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
in a way. And I felt like even like at the beginning of the movie, like it didn't like it felt like it was just like a little older than the modern, so it just makes it last. It doesn't matter what era that you're going into. But, no. All right, the substitute. If you're going to recast any of the main roles, would you recast anyone?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, they did such a good job. Like that movie is so good. I know Dumbledore did get recast.
Yeah,
but that's because Richard Harris passed away and they had to recast him. But what's interesting is the first Dumbledore was very quiet and subdued and much more measured. Then they brought in the new Dumbledore and he's like kind of angry and feisty, which is an interesting take because that's not exactly what he was like in the books. But no, I think it was cast pretty good. I think Snape is awesome. I think he's like this really tough, mean teacher. And I think we all can relate to having somebody, whether it's a teacher, a coach, or somebody who is just extra tough on us. But then if you follow the story, there's reasons, and he's actually like loves Harry. And it's like, oh, sometimes, I had a swim coach who I thought hated me and he was tough all the time. And then when we won the state championship, he was so proud of us. And it was like, oh, he was tough in a way that was like good for us. It was good medicine. So yeah.
I kept seeing the Percy Jackson actor in there. Maybe it's just because it was magic, right? The two of them were closely related, maybe. But I could see them recasting him in one of those roles. But which one it would be, I mean, I don't know. You can't replace Harry Potter.
Nah.
He was perfectly and it is kind of amazing how, like, as kid actors, they also were, like kind of grew up with that series. All right, so mine was the only one that I thought of was, I think it is Snape. He was the professor of like kind of the. Mm-hmm. So all right, my wife's favorite movie of all time is Love Actually. And it was actually on over the weekend, and we watched it, and he's like
Alan Rickman.
Alan Rickman is on there, and I think because I knew him in the Love Actually role so much, it felt, and maybe just because I like just saw them like back to back, I'm like, man, I just couldn't like separate him from the role in Love Actually.
Here I am Googling it so that I can see who we're talking about.
Yeah. But his voice is like amazing. Like his voice in that role is like, oh, like such like exactly the way I would kind of picture.
Well, they're actually creating a whole new Harry Potter show. Have you heard about that?
No.
Oh yeah, it's like
a TV
J.K.
series.
Rowling heading up. Yeah, TV series. It's coming out in like 2 years, but like they're gonna have some like really big names potentially covering some of the characters.
You know what? That's one of the things I thought about him. Like, kind of in the era where this came out, is as a 2.5 hour long movie. Like, oh, I could totally see this as like a 10, 12 episode series on Netflix.
They're doing.
Yeah, and you can actually like see like kind of like the episodes that happen throughout that movie. You're like, oh, that could have been a 30 minute episode.
Yeah.
So, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right. Is there? I'm going to go to this as where are they now? Reunion conversation. So this is 2001. Harry Potter. They're all about 11 years old at this point, and here we are in 2024. So 23 years later, they're in their mid 30s. Trevor, I don't know your age, but
38.
All right, you're probably in that. What do you think they're doing now? What are they doing in the real world?
The actual characters?
The actual characters.
Like, what's Harry doing?
Yeah.
Oh,
what's Harry up to now?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'd hope still using magic and like living this simple, fun, magical life. I mean, you follow that whole story and like some really big, crazy things happened. So hopefully they're getting a chance to relax now, because Harry spent his whole childhood fighting the worst wizard of all time. With his friends, and so like hopefully he's
got a lifetime vacation.
Yeah, I hope he plays with his kids. I hope he's getting to play like in a Quidditch league with his buddies. They're all a little overweight.
It's like a beer league. Quidditch
yeah, a little beer league, Quidditch league. Absolutely, drinking some butter beer. Yeah, so I my hope is that they're getting to chill out a little bit after all that.
Yeah, Ron's just hanging out with them.
Yep, that's right.
No, I feel like they're all instructors. I feel like that they're just right back there doing the same thing, just with the new era of magicians.
Fun to think about. Well, I mean, if you're going to keep going to teaching, I mean, like a lot of people who loved school end up becoming educators. A huge amount do. And so hopefully they're going back and returning the favor.
Did you love school, Trevor?
No. I did not.
But what made you become a teacher?
Because I had a few teachers who had a huge impact on me growing up, and I really loved them. And then I've always really liked reading and writing, and so I went and got an English major just to get a degree, because that's what you do. And then I was like, well, what can I do with this degree? And through a turn of events, I was just like, oh, I would love to be the kind of teacher that had a huge impact on me in my life, that made me love reading and writing, that made me feel safe and secure and confident, that made learning fun and exciting, that were huge fundamental parts of my upbringing, my childhood. So like that was my motivation. And also like I want to be a teacher that like students enjoy learning from and with, which wasn't always my experience. So yeah, it was almost the opposite. Like my reaction to school is what made me want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you feel like that. Those are probably the two things that usually happen most. Like either you love it and you follow it, or it's kind of like your parents too. It's like you either follow the path of your parents or you do the complete opposite.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
good question.
Yeah, so real world. Tell me, I mean, what, Trevor? I know you were an educator, and now you're full time, kind of doing speaking and getting out there in a different capacity, impacting education. What's on the plate for you? What does 2025 look like for you?
Yeah, I just published my third book this year. It's called The New Teacher Mindset, and it's really about how do we have an innovative, adaptable bent to how we view what we're doing in the schools and in classrooms, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but really saying, all right, this still works, so I'm going to lean into it. But this isn't working anymore, and so I've got to try something else. Like, how do you develop that mindset towards technology, towards school space, towards what we teach and how we teach? How do we almost like a counterintuitive look at how we're doing school? And so I published that book, and now I'm spending a lot of time getting to go around and helping teachers work through it and talk about it and learn about it. And so doing keynotes and workshops and working on another book already because I just like to write and making videos, and it's so much fun going into schools and spending time with students and other teachers. So just head first into the whole education world again. I love it.
Very cool. I mean, I that's what I mean. You did a great job presenting at the last conference in Portland with LearningSCAPES, and what struck to me is like clearly you were a very good teacher. You were one that had experiential type of learning. The example you use of like really getting involved and with the local community and meeting with the senior citizens in the community and really integrating that. I'm always torn of like like obviously you could feel like you were called to do it in a different aspect. Was there something about our system though that made it that gave you the urge to say like, all right, I did this really well, but it's time for me to move on into a different capacity?
That's a really good question. I would never say I was running from teaching. Because I still like I still go and will cover teachers' classes a lot, and I'll go do work with certain classes and teach their classes for certain periods of time because I just love it. I love being with students. I love being with kids and watching them learn and grow. But the truth is, it's really hard to do everything you want to do, and so you kind of have to make choices, And so like I absolutely have strong feelings about school and what it can be. And I started getting opportunities to go and share and talk. And, I went and did a TED Talk down in Texas in 2014. And that opened up other opportunities to go and speak and share and write books and do these things. But then it's like, oh, but you get 3 days off a year outside of summer. So, and it's like, oh, well, I want to go and push this thing I believe in forward, but you just cannot do that the way I wanted to while you're in a classroom full time. And so it was tough choices, and it still feels like a tough choice. But it also feels like a good one because I feel like I'm still getting to be with educators and in schools and getting to learn and read and listen and do a podcast where I'm talking to other educators all the time and getting new ideas. And it's like, oh, I feel like that's a good way of serving the education community.
Well, good. Well, thank you for doing this. I feel like we're officially going to welcome you into the Better Learning podcast community. Like these are the people, these are the change makers, breaking down kind of the silos in education and saying, it doesn't matter, if you're supporting the industry, if you're an education leader, if you're a parent, teacher, that's really why we started this podcast. And so along those lines, wherever you're listening, if you're not already a subscriber or watching this too on YouTube, just hit subscribe wherever you're at. betterlearningpodcast.com is our hub for everything. And if you either would want to be a guest or have a recommendation of a guest or a movie that you'd want to talk about, we have forms on there that you can do that and just give us feedback. We really appreciate it. It's really, at the end of the day, we always say this is a community that really cares about education and wants to make sure that we're giving every kid the best opportunity to succeed. And that's why I just really love the community and the people that are involved with this. The Better Learning Podcast is produced by Matt Rogers and edited by Kelly Jones. The views and opinions shared on this podcast are those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily represent the perspectives of their affiliated companies, organizations, or associations.